Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Trails. I'm your host, Stephanie Howe, and today, episode 3, we are going to Colorado. And we are talking with two big names in trail running, both very accomplished trail runners in their own rights, Clare Gallagher and Joe Grant. Really excited to talk to both of you today, a little bit about what's going on in Colorado and some of your recent adventures. But first up, you guys are really the original POW trail team. You both helped to kind of get POW trail off the ground. And so, you've seen it through, and we're just thrilled to have you join us today. So let's just dig right in to start. So why does voting really matter to you in this election?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Super psyched to see where everyone's tuning in from. A lot of people from Colorado and out of state. Joe and I and Stephanie and some other runners you may have heard of, Dakota Jones, Mike Foote, Anton Kaprichka. Basically are so psyched on trail running. I feel so grateful every time I'm out on the trails. And it's been in the last 4 years more than ever that I've realized the way to give back is through participating in democracy. And so that's why I feel so strongly about voting. I think trail running and voting are inextricably connected.
Yeah. Sorry.
They want to help, they want to do something, but they feel like they're a little bit helpless. But we all have the ability to vote, and so that's a great message, especially right now.
Our vote, has a lot of weight right now, and there's a lot of critical issues happening in the regions that we live in, and so. For me personally, it's come more from a kind of local perspective of just getting involved in, local land use and how things are managed, and, just trying to keep on the pulse of what's going on. And at a broader level, that means, voting for policies that are going to help the country, but then, also just paying attention to kind of the local stuff as well. So.
Means a lot to you both as Colorado residents is the CORE Act, the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Economy Act. And do you want to just tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Joe's going to keep the stoke high with a recent run he did through the San Juan's part of the CORE Act. Basically, the CORE Act has been decades in the making. It would protect 400,000 acres of public lands in Colorado. And it's a wide variety of protections. Some include wilderness areas near Summit County, San Juan's, as well in Southwest Colorado. Another part of it is retiring mineral leases on the Thompson Divide near Aspen and Gunnison. And a whole nother part is creating a national recreation area in the Curancanti part of the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. And this is huge with veterans. It would designate Camp Hale, which is right near Vail, Colorado, the first ever national historic landscape. And that's where the 10th Mountain Division troops in World War II trained, high altitude, like mountain training. So it's vast. It's extremely desired by these rural mountain town communities. And we have a champion in Congress right now, many champions, Joe Neguse, who's my rep, and then our Senator Mike Bennett, they're the co-authors of it. And I'll just say the other senator in Colorado has not supported it.
A little bit more, but as Claire mentioned, Joe just did a really big project in the southwestern part of Colorado that went through a lot of the CORE Act area. So I'll kind of let Joe tell us a little bit about that project what it meant to you, why you chose this, and just kind of, how this is related.
Yeah, thanks, Steph.
Yeah,
as Claire mentioned, there's 400,000 acres that are part of the proposed Core Act in Colorado, and there's 60,000 acres in the San Juan mountain range area. I used to live in the Front Range outside of Boulder, and recently moved down to Durango. So this is kind of my new backyard. And San Juan mountain range is a pretty special one. It's the largest range we have in Colorado, and formed like 28 million years ago through these super volcanoes. So it's this quite extraordinary terrain of just eroded calderas, and so there's a lot of very beautiful landscapes, like this little photo here that's popping up from the Mount Sneffels wilderness area. And there's three main zones in the Core Act, specifically in the San Juans: the Lizard Head Wilderness, which is aiming to protect the Mount Wilson, and which is featured here, and I think it's the west side of Mount Wilson, from mining. And then Lizard Head is pretty unique, where there's the this one volcanic pinnacle there, which is named Lizard Head. That's a super striking feature of that wilderness area. And then the two others are, coming back to that photo with the stars, that is the Mount Sneffels wilderness area with the Virginius mine, which is right next to it. So what's interesting about this, the hard rock course actually comes through this zone at the Kroger's Canteen aid station for ultra runners who are familiar with that zone. And this is right below actually that aid station, looking, but the Sneffels would be behind me. So I was up there a couple weeks back, and camping up at 12,500 feet, taking photos of the Neowise comet. And it was a pretty surreal scene, because as you can see here, the mountains are lit up, and it makes for a pretty unique picture. But that's actually the lights of the Virginius mine that was operating all night. So right below where I was camping is private property and the Virginius mine, and they're still drilling holes looking for silver. And apparently they're finding it, because there's Brinks trucks rolling down there all the time. But anyways, the juxtaposition between sort of being in this unbelievably beautiful setting with the Sneffels wilderness right there, and then the mine literally rubbing up against it, is pretty kind of visceral in person to experience. And so for me, the idea of this route that I put together was to leave from my house, from my doorstep, and link, it's about 400 miles of trail and scrambling around the San Juans to experience all of this extraordinary new backyard that I have. And so this is one of the highlights there, is that Sneffels zone, which is part of the Core Act. Now, one of the things that I always suggest to people is to go and experience these places, and really kind of get a feel and touch the dirt, and look at the stars and get amongst it. And then when you have the contrast of the Virginius mine, you can really see this urgency to try and really protect the area. But it's not always possible, obviously, to go. And so hopefully people get inspired from afar to support these initiatives. On the flip side of that, these places are also kind of being loved to death. And another zone that's part of the Core Act is the Sheep Mountain Special Management Area, which includes Island Lakes, also a segment on the Hard Rock course. And Island Lakes has now become this kind of Instagram sensation. where people will go, and it's an island in the middle of a turquoise lake surrounded by, volcanic caldera, limbs of that. And so it's an extraordinary place, but there's so many people that want to go and have that moment on the lake, and myself included. Like I'm speaking of this as a full kind of participant and being out in these places. But we are getting to a point where we're really loving these places to death, and I understand why we want to be there, taking pictures and experiencing the place. But there's also this threat of overuse, and the way we travel and experience these places has a lot of impact on that environment. So I think in this particular case, like the protection, or at least trying to protect it from extractive industries, also is a suggestion for us as people who go there and recreate there, to also do so humbly and kind of really respect those places. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell what the idea behind the project is to really kind of just get out there and explore the backyard and have, I guess, moving experiences that will then push me. They certainly compel me to want to vote for the protection of these places and ensuring that future generations can also benefit from those experiences, and we're not just drilling holes in the top of the mountains. So
totally. Well, and that's one part of why the Core Act, I feel, and I'm guessing that's what you're getting at, is so important. To give designation at a federal level gives, one, there's more jobs involved when a wilderness area is designated or a national rec area. And two, there's more educational resources, just like we're educating on anything, from public health to how to leave no trace. Sending money to protect the areas in the San Juans and everywhere else in the Core Act is as, I think, why we all feel so strongly about it.
Yeah.
It's so confusing that our leaders in Colorado, some of them don't feel strongly about the Core Act when, say, for instance, one of our senators is getting a lot of press for passing the Great American Outdoors Act. And the Core Act is very specific to Colorado. And you can't say you care about public lands if you won't even give a comment on the Core Act. And I think that's important as Coloradans, as we're voting this fall, to really dig in beyond the Great American Outdoors Act and go to the Core Act and read, what are people saying in these communities like Durango or Summit or Aspen or Gunnison.
One thing I just got from listening to both of you is that education is really important as outdoor enthusiasts. So yes, we need to protect from maybe drilling or mining, but we also need to protect from keeping a place special, like keeping it from not being loved to death. And when it comes to voting, really doing your homework, doing your research, making a plan, and knowing what all these issues are, because just as you referenced, Claire, just because someone stands for something doesn't mean they're necessarily supporting all the things that they're saying. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. And if your number one concern is the economy, there's ample research that shows small rural mountain towns like Silverton or Durango, or larger ones like Breckenridge or Silverthorne or Aspen, have stronger economies when there is wilderness area within their county. This isn't breaking news. Protection of public lands is a more sustainable economy for these small towns.
I think that another important piece, especially being, athletes and the common narrative is centered around, FKTs and racing and essentially competition. And I think that there's a lot of great things about that, and I love that aspect of our sport as well. But sometimes applied to wilderness areas, it can become like in terms of that overuse aspect, where the result and the competitive aspect becomes central to the way we're engaging with and talking about the land, as opposed to other angles, like whether it's the geology or the history, and certainly in the current context with this is all Ute mountain land, Ute and Mountain Ute territory, and looking back at our history and gaining more understanding of where we live and how to protect it, not just in a with rules and regulations, but also with reverence and how we kind of engage with the place. I think that's kind of an important shift in conversation that needs to be had in terms of how we recreate out there. And I'm certainly one who has participated in the FKT stuff and all of that heavily, and I still find a lot of enjoyment and I find it still very compelling. But I do think that there's a real need to shift the dialogue a little away from that just single sort of elitist lens to a more kind of inclusive and broader perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Recreating responsibly and thinking of it as not just a selfish endeavor of like seeing this place and using this place, but like respecting this place and protecting.
Yeah, and learning, what is the history. I've only learned about the indigenous history of my own backyard where Joe used to live near Boulder, honestly, in the last few years. And it's been awesome. Realizing the rich, like extremely complex indigenous history, past and present, in Denver, Boulder, Rocky Mountain National Park, all the way to Summit, and where Joe is now down in Durango with really rich Ute history. Yeah, someone asked a pretty good question about, do they think races help? I think it was like races help forward this narrative. I'm actually really curious what you two think. We have Steph, who's won like probably more races than Joe and I combined. We have a lot of trail runners on this, and granted, races aren't a big topic right now, but yeah, I'm curious what you all think.
I have a mixed perspective on this because I think there are races and really they are kind of going above and beyond out of their way to bring awareness to this issue. But I think for the most part, trail races are in this place, whether it be, protected land or just, national, whatever, trails throughout the country, and bringing in a lot of people and running this race through this area. Sometimes there's not really awareness, and especially like bigger races where it draws crowds of like crews and support and people just documenting media. I don't necessarily think that is the best way to bring awareness to climate and the environment. And then there's smaller races for the most part who really emphasize that. So I would love to see more race directors taking on that role. I think Mike Foote is a great example with his Run the Rut,
which is a huge race. It's huge.
It's a huge race, but he does a great job with making it a sustainable, environmentally friendly, supportive race, and really puts that message out there. But that's kind of in the minority right now.
It's like, as consumers, in 2021 or whenever we can like freely race again, choosing these races and letting race directors know how we feel.
Well,
Yeah, what about
well,
you?
I think, yeah, I agree with Steph. And I also think that there's, there's a lot of community momentum that happens with events, races, and gathering. And you can certainly come to an event and, fall in love with it. It happened for me for, coming down to Hard Rock, or even races abroad. And then you become attached to the place and the area and feel that maybe your trail work is more meaningful because it's, maybe it's a part of your registration, but you're also trying to do it. You're doing it because you care about the event that you're taking part in. And so I think there's a lot of good things that come from there are a lot of events that are mindful of the environment and the community and are trying to do better things, even just in terms of equality and keeping things affordable, making sure there's more spots for women, all these kinds of things that are happening that are really great on the racing front. I think like anything, it's more of the excessive nature of our sport where, ultra running is centered around doing a lot of running. And, when you have a lot of people doing a lot of running, it becomes like it can become a pretty, it's just an excessive kind of passion and amount of people doing it. And so I think realistically for an event to be sustainable, it does have to remain fairly small. It's really, really difficult to scale things in sensitive areas, like an event like Hard Rock. You wouldn't be able to have many more participants than they currently do, and still keep the same type of flavor and environmental awareness that they have. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the right thing to do. I'm just saying that it's challenging to scale that in a way that is really low impact. Even just counting travel alone to get to events, which is a whole other kind of topic to racing in general, which we're plenty guilty of. And COVID has shifted quite dramatically. And so that rethinking of, what's worth it, what's not is maybe a little bit more acute right now, and saying if I'm going to take a trip somewhere, it has to have other elements than just a personal fulfillment, sort of piece to it. At least for me now, in this kind of, changing environment.
Right. What educational resources are there? Is it a race that's running, all the profits go to charity, things like that. I have no problem emailing race directors and asking, hey, just double checking that you're cupless. And I know like being cupless is kind of, it's symbolic in many ways, like in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to, stop climate change, but those very kind, because race directors have very hard jobs and a lot of them make like $0. Kind inquiries, I think, are how we continue to progress our sport. And honestly, I'm really proud that our sport is 8.5 million people and growing. Especially like the barrier to entry is lower than a lot of other sports. There's 55 million people who identify as runners in the US. So not necessarily trail runners, but that includes trail runners. And any way that we can help progress the race scene, the education scene,
a fine line of access and affordability and just kind of making sure. And that's where, that's also part of the impetus behind, like, say, putting together routes in your backyard and just looking at what's around and the mountain ranges that you have. And we're really fortunate to live in some pretty extraordinary places, but honestly, every place has some piece of interest in there, whether it's running the creek path or just there's always something kind of cool and unique to find. And I think that's an exciting piece that's available to everybody and that isn't, a barrier to entry. Is just to be curious about,
Yeah. And
explore your backyard. It's a really good thing right now because it is something we can all do. So in a way, this is a great time to be kind of thinking about that and learning more about these
learning
places.
Who's representing us, because even though our elected officials aren't necessarily runners, in most cases, what their take is on climate policy, on public lands policy, on basics of air pollution. I wish I could see everyone watching to raise their hand if they're experiencing poor air quality from the wildfires raging across the American West right now. I know all three of us are. Stephanie's in the Bay. I'm in Boulder. And the status quo of some of our leaders, I mean, the one up top especially, is not in favor of protecting our health or our, and I'm not just talking about us as runners, we're lucky if we have time and the ability to go run for fun. There's lots of people who can't even go outside because their air quality is so crappy right now.
And on that note, kind of bringing it back to Colorado specific, do either of you know what is the status of the CORE Act right now?
Yeah, I just checked it out. So basically, the CORE Act was added as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act in the House of Representatives. So we're talking like DC, because this is a federal act. Joe Neguse added it as an amendment, and it passed in the House with that amendment, but in the Senate, the NDAA passed, but without the CORE Act as an amendment. So what happens in the next month or so is a joint committee between the House and the Senate meets to discuss the differences between their two bills. And this is where Senator Gardner will be really, really influential if he decides to take a stance on the CORE Act or not. Because if he doesn't, then it probably will get left out.
Yeah, so important to educate.
Yeah,
going into
and someone, I think
election.
it was Sam, asked, like, what can people do outside of Colorado? And I think Eliza posted it in the chat. You can write to your rep or your senator, because ultimately every single state, your senators and representatives still have to vote on these national level bills that might just be specific to Colorado. That happens a lot with Alaska. Like every single rep and senator is voting on the Arctic. Even though that's only in Alaska. So you can always reach out to your reps and senators and say, hey, I care about Colorado.
And that's a good segue to, we're going to end today with the Make a Plan to Vote tool, which is a really great way to kind of commit and to get your friends and family ready to vote, because when you have a plan, you're much more likely. So we'll end with that after we wrap up here. But you guys are so knowledgeable about Colorado, the history, the landscape, the legislature right now. And so I think this is really great for a lot of trail enthusiasts to hear, like, it's not just we're fortunate to have these beautiful spaces in Colorado or wherever you live in the country, but we also have this responsibility to protect these places, and we can do that by making our voices heard. We have to do that. It's our
and I think anywhere you are, if you're enjoying trail running, I mean, the first word in that is trail, and so you're out on some kind of public land, or maybe it's private, but you're on the land, and that's an inherent part of the activity that we do. And so I think that having trying to care for that place is pretty paramount to being a participant in it.
Yeah, well, I really want to thank you, both of you, today for sharing your time and kind of telling us a little bit more about what's going on in Colorado and sharing your personal stories too. I think it's incredible to hear, just from your side, you know, what you're seeing and the changes and what we really need to do. So thank you both for being here. And
yeah, thanks, Steph.
yeah,
I would just like to point out that I did not attempt a 400-mile loop this summer. So if you're into the really long, insane stuff, make sure you follow Joe. The inspiration is endless. Also, for especially all the Colorado voters, make sure you're registered to vote. I guess, Steph, you're going to cover that, right? We have like crazy good voting laws. We can all get mail-in ballots.
Yep. Colorado has got some great options for voting. So I also want to remind you that we have 3 more episodes coming up. So on Thursday, we are going to North Carolina to talk with Thomas, who has also just done a really incredible project throughout the whole state. So we'll talk a little bit about what she experienced.
So cool. I'm obsessed with her.
It'll be a great
she's finishing her PhD, and she's a climate scientist, but she studies sharks. And she's this badass runner. Yeah. Marathon trials.
It'll be a really great episode, so make sure to tune in. And we also want to thank Trail Runner Magazine for supporting this series. And 2 lucky attendees from today are going to win a 1-year subscription. So big shout out to them. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you for the support.
Woo.
And with that, we will take you to make a plan to vote. So make sure you check out the resources, take 2 minutes, and make a plan to protect the land.
Vote early. Get all your friends and family.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thanks all. So, Steph, are they supposed to just click on this, makeadamplan.org? Oh, okay. Okay, great.
The outdoor community is over 50 million people, and that's almost 40% of the number of voters in the 2016 elections. And the outdoor community and young people are historically bad at turning out. Even if you feel like it doesn't matter, just please, please, please vote.